Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with George Ryan, who's one of our consultants here at URM. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider Talk Cyber. So George and I are going to be talking about the cybersecurity of small and medium enterprises, or SMEs, today. So my first question for you is, what is the state of cyber risk for SMEs and how different is this to their larger counterparts?
So anyone using technology is going to be at risk in regards to cyber, because if you've got a connection to the world through the internet, they've got a connection to you somehow. In terms of SMEs, it's quite high and actually not too different from larger organizations. It was in the recent DCIT Cyber Breaches Survey 2024, which they found 74% of large organizations had been at risk of a breach. And this was only 10% less, so 64% for small and medium enterprises, which ultimately only a 10% difference, even though large organizations are going to be significantly larger, logically would have more of an attack surface, but that's not really reflected in the numbers very much. So still very high risk for SMEs. It could be for a few reasons as well. For a start, it could be easier to target them because they're less likely to have detection in place. Sometimes it is just a matter of, it doesn't matter your size, you're going to come up on an attacker's radar just because you have something. They might be looking to exploit a certain thing and you just come across them because you have that. Equally, if we think about phishing, everyone gets phishing emails. Doesn't matter if you're a one-man band organization or you're a massive international one, you're always going to receive things such as phishing emails. Ultimately, it's these that kind of add to the risk for SMEs. But yeah, it's a really interesting one because I know from experience of talking to people within SMEs, it's very easy to assume that, oh, we're too small, why would someone target us? Like, we've seen it before, it's like we're a bespoke kind of sandwich shop, and it's like, who's gonna go for us? And it's more so, it's a case of, well, do you have technology in place? Yes. Are you a business? Yes. Ultimately, you are going to be a target for someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And are there any problems that SMEs are finding themselves up against in addressing their cybersecurity posture?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest kind of difficulties is what is needed / optimal versus what budget actually allows for. Obviously, the larger you go with an organization, the more budget you tend to have, the more you can get, a dedicated security team, you can get this fancy tool, which is going to help you, but the smaller you are, the kind of less space you have for that. And therefore it can be difficult to kind of allocate your resources because everything that's allocated needs to be done so effectively. You can't really afford to waste what you're putting your resources into. So I think that's, one of the biggest issues in addressing it is, despite this similar level of risk, you kind of have less going for you in terms of mitigating said risk. In some cases, like I mentioned earlier, where it could be hard to see yourself as a target because you're small, there's also the risk of the culture of security within the SMEs. It can be very easy, like I said, where you think you are smaller, you're less likely a target, to then be less likely to take on kind of cyber secure practices or kind of have that within the organization. And that can then stem into things. So, for example, if we take the phishing example from earlier, it's more likely in a large organization, you're going to have some kind of robust procedures. You might have a tool that recognizes it's phishing. You might have like a method of reporting it. That may then go to a incidents mailbox in the large organization. It can be kind of sorted from there and it can escalate. Whereas potentially if you've got a smaller organization, it could just be a case of, I've got a phishing email, I'll just delete it. I'm not going to let anyone know we've had it. That one might then be going around the office. It's kind of harder to actually have things in place to address things without obviously having the culture that you need to do so. I think additionally, kind of again, going off of that, it can be quite hard to bring it to leadership in an SME. Obviously, where you are an SME or well, any size organization, your focus is obviously on the financials, keeping the business afloat and running. And it can be very hard to kind of get it to leadership for improving your cybersecurity, because you may turn around and say, well, we've not had any incidents yet, so I'm not going to spend the money here because we need this for this project. Whereas obviously the larger up you go, the more likely you are to have a dedicated budget for cybersecurity. Yeah, it can come out of that budget. Small organizations, it might just be a case of we don't have a budget for cyber, we can't make space for this. I don't know how we're going to address this. Like, where are we pulling this money from? What's going on here?
So on the flip side of that, George, what would you recommend to an SME looking to improve their cybersecurity posture?
So I think one of the big things that you kind of could look towards doing is gaining a certification. So for example, you have Cyber Essentials, which is a government-backed scheme aimed at being for any size organization to implement. And by going for certification, you can actually receive some external assurance on your cybersecurity practices, because it could be very easy without kind of following a dedicated program to assume you're doing a great job, but actually you could have kind of large oversights. Whereas actually, if you're following something which is a set out program, you're more likely to cover the fundamentals. So for Cyber Essentials, it's really focused on those kind of fundamentals of your cybersecurity, and it's not trying to sell you any fancy tools. It's not telling you, you need to spend millions to do it. It's just kind of focused on the main areas of cybersecurity. It's working on your user access control, security updates, your patching, configuration, malware protection, how your firewalls are set up, routers, looking into other things that potentially could be forgotten. So, you might be in a small, medium enterprise, and you might completely just forget that obviously people join, people leave. Okay, how do you deal with that from a cyber perspective? I'm sure we've all seen it in the news where it will be, the treasurer of XYZ place was actually taking money off them, etc. It can happen at any size. But with Cyber Essentials, it's looking at, okay, they've left the organization. How are you ensuring that they don't still have access to what you have? Another example from Cyber Essentials is providing the least privilege required. So it's actually checking that you are not giving more privilege than is needed, because the more privilege you have, the more that can be done. So if an attacker gets an account that doesn't actually need to have access to everything, they've then got access to everything. It's how do you mitigate that? How do you kind of reduce the chance of that happening? In terms of like actual feedback from Cyber Essentials, in their cyber impact survey, the government found that 91% found it directly improved their confidence in protection. And again, this stems up to leadership. It gives them an idea of the state of cybersecurity within the organization. It brings it to the table. You've got this certification that not only is providing you external assurance for, reasonably cheap. I probably glossed over that bit. Cyber Essentials isn't a massively expensive thing. Like with some standards, you could be looking to spend, up to £50,000. It could take 3 years to implement. Cyber Essentials, it's a great one for SMEs. It's fairly cheap. The guidance is free. So you don't even need to necessarily get it, but you've got the guidance there, which shows you where you need to allocate your resources. Obviously, like I said, that stems to leadership. It gives them an idea of cybersecurity. And you're having someone external to you check it. And this external person, they're not getting paid for you to pass. They're getting paid to mark you up against Cyber Essentials requirements. So you're getting impartial review there. That's something you can show. Where you to pass, you can actually say, yes, we've got our Cyber Essentials. This isn't a case of, just trust our IT guy that's told you we're doing these practices. It's, no, here we go. We've been independently assessed and they've said we are following this government-backed scheme. And I think further to that, obviously, it's quite important to understand that with Cyber Essentials, it's not the be all end all scheme. No scheme is going to make you impenetrable, invulnerable, anything like that. It's cyber. We could wake up tomorrow, there's a new attack. What it does do is it allows you to have a solid foundation to which you can then further build upon depending on what way you want to go. It can be really hard without following a scheme like Cyber Essentials to actually get these initial building blocks to then go off of, because you could completely go down different rabbit holes, completely avoid one area of cybersecurity, focusing on another, actually leave yourself really weak. Whereas here, it's more of a holistic approach, which can then be built up, which is what some people do. I think from the survey, I think it was around 76% they found did actually advance beyond Cyber Essentials to add a bit more security procedures. And you could argue, were they not to do Cyber Essentials, would they actually know what further procedures they'd want to have in place? This brings it to the table. You've got your requirements that you're against. And then once you've got that, because you should always be looking to improve your cybersecurity, it kind of allows you to then build upon what you've already got and kind of venture into different areas of cybersecurity. And that might be going, okay, great, we've got these basics. I think we'd really benefit having something that actually works on detection here. So we'll look to get that. Whereas previously you might go, okay, oh God, we need something for detection. What else do we need to do? Oh, we got a network. Our network's safe, right? And you may completely forget about the fact you've got firewalls or how you're handling them, what services you have open, who's checking them. But the scheme is forcing you to actually check over these things. You can almost see it in some ways as a checklist to an extent. And it's go, oh yeah, I hadn't actually thought about covering that. Or, where you may use an IT provider, you may go, actually, I don't know if we do that. And that's going to force you to find out. You then find out, you go, okay, are we doing that? Are we not? Okay, great. We are doing this thing. Okay, actually, we're doing that. I want to do a bit more. Can we do this on top of it? So I guess in summary, Cyber Essentials is just a great starting point for building a solid foundation from which you can then work off of to further improve your cybersecurity. But without having a proper program in place, it can be very vague and kind of ambiguous where you are allocating your resources. Again, your SMEs, you want to make sure the resources you have are allocated effectively. You want to get the most return on investment, the most bang for your buck. And I guess just adding on the back of that, Cyber Essentials is something which is continuously improving. So I know April 2025, we have a new version coming out, which is now including passwordless authentication, covering more configuration changes for vulnerabilities, which is really good because these are things that, again, it can be easy to forget, with your configuration changes. I know when I was doing the penetration testing, so a bit of the ethical hacking, one of the first things you may look for is, okay, are they using an outdated version of this? Have they configured it to the newest? Oh, they haven't. Okay, well, this is really easy to exploit because of this, this, and this. And again, you can look online. There are websites that will continuously scan and look for said configuration changes. And go, oh, they're using version 1 of this. Well, this has got a ton of weaknesses to this. Whereas actually now with Cyber Essentials, it's looking towards that. Have you actually updated to this? And just doing that, you are actually getting rid of a load of exploits, because it's really easy to forget what you're updating. Lots of organizations are guilty of it. It happens, but with a program like this in place, it's more likely, and it's going to allow you to ensure that you are doing it within a reasonable time frame.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are the big things. Is Cyber Essentials is inexpensive, it's relatively straightforward, and it's effective. And I think for, as you said, a small medium enterprise just starting out on their cybersecurity journey, that's an amazing place to start. Those are the 3 key factors that you want to make sure that you're not vulnerable to the sort of low-hanging fruit, I suppose you could say.
Yeah, it's really just building you up in every area. And again, like, the guidance is free. So anyone looking at it, just look at the guidance first. That's going to give you a lot of things that you can do. You don't necessarily need to go further out on the first day, but yeah, just have a look at what's out there, see what you're doing, compare it, and go from there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time today, George. And if you want to learn a bit more about this topic, George has written a blog that's on our website, urmconsulting.com, and the blog is called Cyber Essentials, Improving Your Cybersecurity as an SME. Thank you, George, and thank you for listening today. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.